Hi guys, so if you're watching this video, that means you've chosen this image of the persimmons in a basket. This is the intermediate level of difficulty, so it's for if you're feeling pretty confident with your draftsmanship, particularly in terms of mapping out forms to create structure. So let's get into it. First, we want to make sure that we're aware of all the major details we need to include in this drawing. All right, that's listed over here. We want the stems and leaves of the persimmons. I'm going to use my mouse to show what I mean by that. The stem is here and the leaf is directly around it. It's this really dried out, dark brownish green looking thing. All right, we got 3 instances of those. We got some pretty interesting irregular shapes. We definitely want to include those. All right, you want to have the basket itself. All right, this is a basket. It's kind of these how many sides are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's sort of like an octagonal, tapered octagonal shape. But we can talk about the simpler form we can set that up with. So we want the basket. We want the sprig of sage. What I'm talking about there is this this piece of small tree looking thing. Okay. We want the handkerchief folds. The handkerchief over here, overall, it's got a rectangular shape to it, but check out these folds that kind of go back and forth. Right? We want to capture that. We also want the seeds inside the persimmon. We got one cut in half on the lower left corner here. Right? These lines over here. Those are the seeds. This one, actually, no, those lines, they're not quite seeds. They're, I think, part of the fibrous part. But yeah, this one seed, we want to capture that in there. And then we have the knife handle. Okay, it's got a slightly irregular shape. We're going to walk through how to draw each of these. All right. So, as we discussed in class, you want to start with the largest forms possible. The largest form that I'm noticing is that of the basket. All right. The closest thing I can think of to match it is a tapered cylinder, meaning a cylinder that's wider on top than it is on the bottom at the base. So just taking a second to study that basket. Yeah, I want a large... I definitely want the rim of the basket to be as large as I can make it, so that I actually have the space to include the persimmons inside of it. So I'm drawing a large oval, okay, large oval. And then I'm going to draw a smaller oval just slightly towards the bottom like this, that's overlapping. And then here, some straight lines between the edges of those ovals. All right, so you gotta. The actual basket itself isn't shaped like this, but we just want the overall for now. Okay. Inside of the basket, we have the actual persimmons. I'm gonna lighten this portion of what I drew so I can include the persimmons and they can be a little clearer. The persimmons themselves, they're not perfect spheres. All right. They're kind of squished on the top and bottom slightly, but since they are quite close to spheres, we're going to treat them as such for now. Okay. So I've got the one in front over here. Got the one towards the left, right behind it, right there. And then we have the third one behind all those guys right about here. We've also got the persimmon that's cut in half towards this side. All right. Since I'm working on a landscape paper that's sideways like this, I'm going to change the composition just a little bit so I can fit everything in there. For a persimmon cut in half, I'm actually going to start with a full circle to represent a full sphere. And remember how we laid those ovals right inside those spheres? I'm going to do the same, fairly wide. All right. And the top portion of the sphere, I'm going to erase to leave me with the bottom hemisphere just cut like that. The handkerchief is underneath the basket. It's a rectangular shape overall. So I'm going to map that out like this. And the knife handle, we got it over here. I'm going to start off with a rectangular prism for that too. I mean, this wasn't a prism. The rectangle I just drew is just a flat rectangle, like a parallelogram. But for the knife handle, I'm going to start with a rectangular prism. So parallel to this guy, I'm going to draw two lines. And then parallel to this line. From that point, I'm going to give it some thickness. The knife handle is not rectangular. It's not shaped like this, but it's just our starting point. All right. Okay, so those are our largest forms that I could find. I'm omitting. Well, I guess I can include it. We have like a part of a persimmon that's visible here. Okay. Now that we got the largest forms placed, now we want to think about the smaller details that we can add on to it. Okay. Most of these lines, actually all these lines, they're not going to be our final lines. These are our construction lines. Let's see. I'm going to clean this up a bit, meaning this persimmon is in front of all the others. So all the arcs that are within it, I'm going to erase, give it a little more clarity. There, so front, second in line, last. What I'm going to do is start with the stems and leaves of this persimmon that's in front. In order to do that, I'm looking at the reference and it looks like it's almost a circle that's sitting kind of right on top here. All right. That's just to map it out. Within that, there's the actual stem. It looks like the stem has this kind of shape going on with it. Sort of protrudes out. Okay. And there's a bulbous portion of it that sits down here. And then from there, the leaves kind of radiate out. But they're all dried. What I'm next going to do is trace out the outermost shape of those leaves, going really, really slow. And let's see, this technique is actually called contour drawing, right? Let me bring up the larger image so I can show you what I mean. With my pencil, I'm going to start where my mouse is, slowly move, keep on observing with my eyes, and I'm going to follow this outermost line. It's a very irregular shape, but where my mouse is going is where my pencil is going to be going as well. Very, very slowly. Okay, until I go all the way around to my starting point. So starting here, go good and slow. When you're starting off, go even slower than I am right now. And follow the outermost edge of those leaves. For speed's sake, I'm going to go a little faster so I can keep the video as concise as possible. But I want you to go extra slow, slow motion when it comes to this step. All right, so that's our stem and leaf for this, for the persimmon that's in front of us. I'm going to go through much of the same process for this guy over here. But before I do, let me see if there's anything else I'd want to add. There is a lot of rich detail in terms of there being shadows within the leaves. We're going to talk a lot more about that when we learn more about contour drawing itself. But if I were to give you a preview of that, all the dark portions within the leaves, I would do a contour drawing of those as well, and it would look something like this. Okay, but it's okay for you to leave that out for now. I'm going to draw a small oval for the stem. Kind of oval within that one. Sticking out from that hole, from the center of that, is the actual stem. Okay, we sort of this straw shape. And then from there, I'm going to use the same technique of following the contour, really nice and slow. Contour drawing itself deserves a whole separate lesson. So for now, just do your best with what I'm doing. I understand that just the explanation and the quick demo probably isn't enough. But that's all right. It's part of stretching yourself beyond where you're currently at. And if you chose this image, it's because you wanted a little bit of a challenge. Okay. All right, the stem over here, we don't really see the kind of base of it like we do for here and here. But we do see the stem itself popping out pretty noticeably like that. Same deal for the leaves of the persimmons. Slowly following the outermost edges. And I'm going to trace out some of the shadows just to make it look like the stem is sitting inside of a convex shape right there. And that's it for the stems and leaves. I'm going to leave it at that. All right. Take a look at the basket. In order to get a good read of the basket, it's actually I think it's going to be a good idea to clean up the outermost lines of these persimmons. So I'm going to darken in the outlines, turning the paper to help my wrist have a natural motion to it. Just work in small segments here. All right, I'm stopping over here around the point where I know the basket's going to go in front of it. And I'm going to do that for each of my persimmons here. You notice I do a small segment, turn the paper, do another small segment. I want you to try that out too, okay? Here I'm going to leave a little space because I know the sprigs of the sage are going to be there. Actually, you know what? My mistake. I mislabeled that. That's not sage. That's thyme. It's okay. Okay, now let's get to this basket. When I look at the reference image, the basket definitely isn't like a cylindrical tray like this. It's got a lot of detail in it in terms of there's some, I don't know what to call it, but there's some fine detailing, right? And it's not a solid piece, which is something pretty attractive about it. I'm going to erase this top portion because it was a little messy. Between this and this persimmon is the first kind of portion of the basket I want to hard line in there. If you notice in the reference image, it's like a piece of a segment over here, and we see another thinner portion right there. And then the basket does swing around, and we see the rim of it kind of making a turn over here. So the rest of the basket's pretty all right for me to work with in terms of the construction line I made. Let's see how best to do this. We got some octagonal segments. I'm just going to put a line here to map that out. Okay. There's another kind of portion of the segment there. And then here, between these lines is actually a slight curve, like this. Okay. So between here and here too. I'm going to adjust the angle of this line. To make it seem like it's tapering down. And the bottom portion of the basket, I'm going to darken that in. To clean this up a bit, I'm going to erase all the lines within these planes that we just drew out. I'm going to leave this for now, okay, because that's where the time's going to be. Yeah. The detailing of the basket, I could go a lot farther in terms of adding in those tiny little lines and the light that's shining through them, but for the purpose of this drawing, I don't think that's necessary. Let's move on to this guy. The outlines of it are pretty much going to stay the same. What I want to include is that star shape pattern, as well as that seed popping out of it. To do that, I'm going to lightly draw across, and then two diagonal lines sort of evenly spaced like that. We're not going to keep these. These are just construction lines. You can erase the middle and erase along the edges of those lines. And there you have your star pattern. Kind of go back in there, make a long sort of rounded slot shape at each of those lines. This one I'm going to leave because that's where the seed's going to pop out of it. Yeah, the seed is kind of this arch shape that pops out, has some thickness to it like that. And then we see the rest of that kind of star pattern looking thing pop out there. And then, yeah, I'm going to go over the outlines of this, make it nice and clean. And I want the bottom portion of it here. All right. Let's work on that handkerchief. The portion of the handkerchief over here, I'm not going to do much with it except round out this corner a bit. Okay, so instead of a sharp corner right there, I'm rounding it out. Darkening this guy in. And if you notice here, on purpose, I made the line a little bit wavy. Handkerchief's not ironed and like it's not perfectly flat. Okay, so the edges, you can like round it out a bit. So when it comes to the folds of that handkerchief, got some interesting things going on. I'm going to darken in this portion first. Essentially, here's the technique you can use. It's kind of similar to how you would draw curtains. You want to go in a loop-de-loop, wavy line pattern, slowly, okay? Back and forth. All right. I'm going to add another loop. Coming in on the inside of all these guys. Just folding in on itself. Over here, just going to add a tiny line. Over here, tiny line like that. That indicates that those are the edges of the handkerchief that's kind of folded in. If you want to add a couple more loops here. Maybe one on the outside. Looks pretty all right. The knife handle. Even though it's not a rectangular prism, starting with it can be useful because it'll at least show us where the variation is. So instead of going straight, I can see that the knife has a bow to it. So I'm going to add that, okay? It bows out this way. Okay, on the top surface, sort of follows some of that bow, but it's less pronounced. And then at the butt of the handle, sort of terminates like this. So this is the top surface of the handle. Could give that some thickness now. And then we got the pins that are holding the blade in place. There's these broad ovals. It's not in the photo, but I'm going to add a third one here. Last element is the time. The time, you want to draw it basically just one petal of it at a time, one leaf of it at a time. It's these long, curving shapes over here. And if you draw one at a time, it's easier for you to know which ones go behind the other. I'm referring to my image every time I draw a new one to keep it as accurate as possible, but you can make up your own shapes as well. Just don't do one of these guys to represent it. Okay, like actually take a shot at drawing what you see as you see it instead of like a symbol or a cartoon of it. All right, I got some time leaves over here. Looking kind of like that. All right, I'm going to add a couple more. And the rest of the basket that we see behind the time, I'm going to finish that off right now. Okay, so the construction lines that I started off with, that at this point are just kind of making the image a little more messy. I'm going to erase as much of them as I can. You don't have to get at all of them, all right? Some of them I kind of like to keep in there. For instance, these construction lines within the sphere or within the persimmon, I'm not so worried about that. But these guys that are outside of it, yeah. This guy, I didn't really get to. But since I switched around the composition to match my landscape one over here, I think I'm gonna leave it out, and that's okay. It's a good amount of detail, right? If you want to challenge yourself, you can go ahead and get some patterning on this basket. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell from the photo of what that patterning is like, but it's an opportunity for you to take some creative license, kind of make one up. For me, the way I would approach it is kind of these overlapping hemispheres. See what that looks like. That looks kind of funky, but that's just my kind of construction line. I would go back in there and give each one of these kind of punch out. So we're kind of just double lining these. That's looking pretty all right. I'm gonna erase this so I could give the rim of the basket a thicker edge. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. Gonna map out that thickened edge before I do the same on these faces. Lightly drawing my little wave pattern. Now, I'm kind of showing you this for the basket, not as a requirement, okay? You could leave it where it was before this. This is kind of if you're done with your drawing and you want to give it a little bit more love, okay? I'm not looking to be supremely precise here. Just want to give it a sense that this is a basket with some nice looking holes in it. Okay. One more side. All right. It's looking pretty good. Looking pretty done. Okay. Can't wait to see yours. Good luck.